The shadow of her husband's retreating back stretched long across the desert floor, his final words cutting deeper than any knife could reach. Willow Harper sobbed uncontrollably beside the crackling campfire, her slender shoulders shaking with each breath as the flames illuminated the tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. She didn't hear the approach of boots crunching on the hard, packed earth, didn't notice the tall figure until his shadow fell across her, blocking the firelight. "Madam," a low voice said, "seems you could use some company." The year was 1878, and the Arizona Territory had little sympathy for a woman alone. Willow's head jerked up at the sound of the unfamiliar voice. Through blurred vision, she made out the silhouette of a man, tall and broad-shouldered against the night sky. Her hand instinctively reached for the small derringer hidden in the folds of her skirt. "I don't want any trouble," she managed between sobs, her voice raspy from crying. The stranger stepped into the firelight, revealing a weathered face beneath the brim of a dusty hat. His eyes, clear and blue as a summer sky, studied her with concern rather than threat. He raised his hands slightly, showing he meant no harm. "Neither do I, madam. Name's Brock Northcott. Saw your fire from the ridge, then saw a man ride off in quite the hurry." He paused, noticing the way her face crumpled at the mention. "Didn't seem right to leave a lady alone out here." "My husband," Willow choked on the word. "He's gone, said he couldn't do this anymore." Her fingers clutched at the simple gold band on her left hand, twisting it as if it might somehow summon back the man who had promised her forever, only to abandon her 3 weeks into their journey west. Brock didn't move any closer. Instead, he slowly lowered himself to sit on a flat rock opposite her across the fire, giving her space while offering the comfort of his presence. "Mind if I stay a while? Night's no time to be alone in these parts." Willow wiped her tears with the back of her hand, suddenly conscious of how she must look face streaked with dust and tears, her brown hair falling loose from its pins, her blue calico dress rumpled and travel-stained. She nodded silently, too exhausted to refuse the kindness of a stranger when everything familiar had just ridden away into the darkness. "He took the best horse," she finally said, her voice small. "Left me the wagon, supplies, said I could make it back east if I wanted." She laughed bitterly. "As if I have anything to go back to." Brock's gaze traveled over their surroundings, a small covered wagon, a single horse grazing nearby, the meager campsite that clearly had been meant for two, heading to California. He asked, pulling a tin cup from his saddlebag and pouring coffee from the pot suspended over her fire. "Prescott," she corrected. "James had a cousin there, said we could start fresh." Her voice broke. "Said a lot of things that weren't true, apparently." Brock offered the cup across the fire. Their fingers brushed as she accepted it, and Willow was struck by how steady his hands were, how solid his presence felt in a world that had just tilted beneath her feet. "Drink," he encouraged. "Then get some rest. I'll keep watch tonight." "Why would you help me?" Willow asked, suspicion finally breaking through her grief. "You don't know me." The cowboy looked into the fire, shadows playing across his features. There was a scar along his jawline, Willow noticed, and his hands bore the calluses of a man who worked for everything he had. "Because 17 years ago, my mama was left alone with 4 children when my daddy decided mining silver was more important than raising his family," he said simply. "A stranger helped her get to town safely. I'm just paying that forward." For the first time in hours, Willow felt something besides despair. It wasn't hope, not yet, but perhaps its distant cousin, the faint awareness that the world hadn't ended, even if her marriage had. "Thank you," she whispered, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. As the night deepened around them, Brock shared stories of the territory, speaking in that low, steady voice until her tears dried and exhaustion finally pulled her toward sleep. He spread his bedroll near the fire, but a respectful distance from her wagon, his rifle close at hand. Just before dawn, Willow woke to find him still there, keeping his promise, his eyes scanning the horizon as the first pale light revealed the vastness of the land around them. "Made some breakfast," he said when he noticed she was awake. "Nothing fancy, just beans and hardtack." It was the first meal she hadn't prepared herself in weeks. Willow sat on an upturned crate, watching this stranger who had appeared like some guardian spirit in her darkest moment. "I don't know what to do now," she admitted as she accepted the tin plate. "James handled everything." The maps, the planning, I don't even know how far we are from the nearest town. Brock poured her a fresh cup of coffee. Hollister's Creek is about 2 days' ride from here. Decent enough place. You could rest up, figure your next move. He hesitated. I'm heading that direction myself. Would be no trouble to see you get there safely. The offer hung in the air between them. Willow studied him in the morning light. His clothes were worn but clean, his movements efficient as he packed up the camp. There was nothing of James's flashy charm about him, nothing of the quick smiles and quicker promises that had swept her off her feet and across the country. Why Hollister's Creek? She asked. Got a small ranch about 10 miles beyond, nothing fancy but it's mine. Was in town delivering some horses when I spotted your fire. He shrugged. Fate, maybe. Willow thought about choices. The ones that had brought her here, alone in the wilderness with a stranger who'd shown more decency in one night than her husband had in their final weeks together. I'd be grateful for your escort, Mr. Northcott. Brock, he corrected, a small smile softening his weathered features. Out here, formalities don't mean much, Willow nodded. Willow, she offered in return. They broke camp efficiently, Brock checking the wagon's wheels and helping her harness her remaining horse. He showed her how to secure the brake properly for the steep descents they'd encounter, his explanations clear and patient. James never bothered to teach me any of this, she admitted, watching Brock's capable hands adjust a strap. Some men prefer keeping women dependent, he said, a note of disapproval in his voice. Makes them feel important. Their journey began slowly, the wagon creaking over the rutted trail while Brock rode alongside on his paint horse. He pointed out landmarks, teaching her how to read the land, where to find water, which plants were safe to eat, how to spot signs of other travelers. You know a lot about surviving out here, she observed as they stopped to water the horses at midday. Had to learn, he replied, scanning the horizon with practiced eyes. Territory doesn't forgive mistakes. By late afternoon, dark clouds were building in the western sky. Brock frowned up at them, storm coming. We should find shelter before it hits. Is there somewhere nearby? Willow asked, eyeing the gathering darkness with concern. Old line cabin about a mile ahead, used by the stage company before the route changed. Brock adjusted his hat. Not much, but it'll keep us dry. The cabin was little more than a single room with a stone fireplace and a sagging roof, but Willow nearly wept with relief when they reached it just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Brock quickly unhitched the horses and led them to a lean-to at the side of the cabin, while Willow hurried inside with their provisions. The interior was dusty but intact, with a crude table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed frame with no mattress. Willow busied herself sweeping out the worst of the dirt with a bundle of dried grass while Brock brought in firewood. Not the Plaza Hotel, he commented wryly, setting kindling in the fireplace, but it'll do. The storm hit with sudden fury, rain lashing at the windows and thunder rolling across the sky. Inside, the fire cast dancing shadows as they shared a simple meal. For the first time, Willow found herself truly looking at the man across from her, the quiet strength in his bearing, the thoughtfulness in his eyes. Tell me about your ranch, she said, wanting to think of something besides James's betrayal. Brock's face softened at the question. It's not much to look at yet, 160 acres, got a small herd of cattle, some horses I'm training, building it up little by little. He hesitated. Had a partner once, but he wanted to try his luck mining in California. So you're alone, got some help during roundup. Rest of the time, it's just me and the stock. His eyes met hers across the fire. What about you? You mentioned there's nothing to go back to. Willow stared into the flames. My parents died 2 years ago. Fever took them both within days of each other. I was teaching at the local school when I met James. She twisted her wedding band again. He was passing through selling farm equipment, said he was tired of the road, wanted to settle down somewhere new, start fresh. And you believed him? I wanted to, she admitted. The town felt so empty after my parents died, and James was. She searched for the word alive. He made everything seem possible. Brock nodded, understanding in his eyes. Dreams can be powerful medicine or poison, Willow replied bitterly. 3 weeks on the trail, and he tells me he's made a mistake, that he's not cut out for homesteading after all, that there's a silver strike in Nevada he wants to try his luck at. Her voice hardened. Said he never should have saddled himself with a wife. Outside, lightning cracked, illuminating the small cabin in harsh white light. In that flash, Brock saw the pain etched in Willow's face, but also something else, a determination that hadn't been there the night before. "His loss," Brock said quietly. Willow looked up, surprised by the simple statement and the certainty behind it. Later, as the storm continued to rage, Brock insisted she take the bed frame while he spread his bedroll near the fire. Despite her exhaustion, Willow lay awake, listening to the rain and the occasional crackle of the fire. Across the room, she could make out Brock's silhouette, his breathing steady and rhythmic, a stranger who had stopped to help her simply because it was the right thing to do. A man with calloused hands and kind eyes who treated her with a respect James had gradually stripped away during their journey. It struck her then the reason for her tears the night before hadn't been just about being abandoned. It had been about the slow realization that the man she married wasn't the man she thought he was. Morning arrived with clearing skies and a world washed clean by the storm. They ate a quick breakfast and set out again, the trail muddy but passable. By mid-afternoon, they crested a rise, and Brock pointed to a cluster of buildings in the distance. "Hollister's Creek," he announced. "Not much, but they've got a decent hotel, general store, and a doctor who knows what he's doing." Willow felt a strange reluctance as they approached the town. In 2 days, she'd grown accustomed to Brock's quiet presence, the safety she felt in his company. "What will you do now?" he asked as they rode down the main street, drawing curious glances from the townspeople. A woman traveling with a man not her husband was cause for speculation, but Willow found she cared little for their judgment. "I have some money," she said. "James didn't take that, at least. Enough to stay at the hotel for a while until I figure things out." She hesitated. "I taught school before." "Perhaps they need a teacher here." Brock nodded thoughtfully. "Town's growing, lots of families moving in." He guided them toward a 2-story building with a sign reading Hollister House Hotel and Dining. The hotel owner, Mrs. Lennox, was a formidable woman with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that took in Willow's situation with one glance. To her credit, she asked no questions when Brock explained that Mrs. Harper would need a room for an indefinite stay. "Got a nice room at the back." "Quieter there," she said, handing Willow a key. "$1 a night includes breakfast. Suppers are extra, served from 5 to 7. Willow thanked her, then turned to Brock, suddenly uncertain. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," he replied, hat in his hands. "I should get going." "Got chores waiting." "Of course." Willow felt foolish for the disappointment that washed over her. What had she expected? That this kind stranger would remain by her side indefinitely? "Thank you again for your help." Brock nodded, placed his hat back on his head, and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "I come into town every Saturday for supplies. If you need anything—" "I'll be fine," Willow assured him, straightening her shoulders. "But thank you." After he left, Mrs. Lennox showed Willow to a small but clean room with a real bed, the first she'd sleep in since leaving St. Louis. After washing away the dirt of travel in a proper bath, Willow sat on the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden silence and the enormity of her situation. She was alone in a strange town, her future uncertain. Yet somehow she felt stronger than she had in months. Making her own decisions, however small, was a freedom she hadn't realized James had slowly taken from her. The next morning, Willow set out to explore the town, determined to find a way forward. Hollister's Creek was larger than it had appeared from a distance, a proper main street lined with businesses, side streets with neat houses, a church, and to her delight, a schoolhouse at the edge of town. Her steps led her there almost without conscious thought. The building was simple but well-maintained, with children's drawings visible through the windows. As she stood contemplating it, the door opened, and a harried-looking older man emerged, nearly colliding with her. "Oh. Pardon me, madam," he apologized, adjusting spectacles that sat crookedly on his nose. "My fault entirely," Willow replied. "I was admiring the school." The man brightened. "Are you new to town? I'm Edwin Pearson, the schoolmaster." He frowned slightly. "Though not for much longer, I fear. My daughter in Denver is expecting my first grandchild, and I've promised to move there by month's end." Willow felt her heart quicken. "Actually, Mr. Pearson, I was a teacher back east before I—" She hesitated. "Before I came west." Pearson's eyes widened. "Providence," he declared. "Pure Providence." The town council has been fretting about finding my replacement. Would you consider speaking with them? 2 days later, Willow stood before the town council, 5 men of varying ages who regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. She answered their questions about her qualifications, her teaching philosophy, and her personal circumstances with as much dignity as she could muster. Mrs. Harper, said Mr. Gallagher, the owner of the general store and head of the council, while your qualifications seem adequate, we must express concern about your situation. A woman alone, especially one with an absent husband. My husband abandoned me on the trail, Willow stated flatly, tired of dancing around the truth. He will not be returning. I need employment and you need a teacher. I believe we can be of service to each other. The directness of her statement silenced the room. Finally, Reverend Walsh, the youngest of the council members, cleared his throat. Mrs. Harper speaks sense, gentlemen. The children need education more than they need gossip about their teacher's marital status. In the end, they offered her the position on a trial basis, 3 months to prove herself, with housing provided in the small apartment attached to the schoolhouse. Willow accepted immediately, relief washing over her at the prospect of having purpose again, a place of her own, work that she loved. That Saturday, true to his word, Brock came to town. Willow was leaving the general store when she spotted him tying his horse outside the blacksmith's. Something warm unfurled in her chest at the sight of him, that broad-shouldered silhouette now familiar in a way that made her both nervous and pleased. Mr. Northcott, she called, crossing the street toward him. He turned, surprise and something like pleasure crossing his face before he schooled his expression. Mrs. Harper, you're looking well. She was. A week of proper meals and purpose had brought color back to her cheeks and a light to her eyes that had been missing that night by the fire. I have news, she told him, unable to contain her excitement. I've been hired as the new school teacher. I start Monday. Genuine happiness spread across his face. That's wonderful news. Congratulations. I move into the teacher's quarters tomorrow. It's not much, but it's a start. She hesitated, then added, I wanted to thank you again. If you hadn't helped me that night. You'd have managed, he said with quiet confidence. You're stronger than you know. Their conversation was interrupted by the blacksmith calling Brock inside to discuss horseshoes, but before he left, he turned back to her. I usually take my supper at Rose's Cafe when I'm in town, around 6, if you'd care to join me. The invitation hung between them, casual yet weighted with possibility. I'd like that, Willow replied, surprising herself with how much she meant it. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Willow threw herself into teaching, gradually winning over both her students and their initially wary parents with her dedication and skill. On Saturdays, she would meet Brock for supper at Rose's, where they would exchange stories of their week, her tales of schoolroom triumphs and challenges, his accounts of ranch life, and the characters he encountered in his work. They were careful to meet in public, mindful of her position and the town's watchful eyes. Yet something was growing between them, a friendship built on mutual respect and genuine enjoyment of each other's company. Willow found herself looking forward to Saturdays with an anticipation that both thrilled and frightened her. During the week, she kept busy with her students and making her small quarters into a home. The town ladies, seeing her industry and propriety, gradually accepted her presence. Mrs. Lennox from the hotel became a particular ally, often bringing baked goods to the school for the children, but clearly intended as a kindness to Willow as well. 3 months passed, then 6. Willow received word that her position as teacher was now permanent, with a modest raise in salary. She wrote to the town where she and James had lived, informing them of her new situation and requesting that any correspondence be forwarded to Hollister's Creek. Part of her wondered if James would ever try to contact her, but as the seasons changed, she found herself thinking of him less and less. Instead, her thoughts increasingly turned to Brock. Their Saturday suppers had become the highlight of her week, and occasionally he would bring her small gifts, a book he'd picked up in a larger town during a cattle sale, wildflower seeds for the patch of dirt behind her quarters that she was determined to turn into a garden. As winter approached, Willow realized with some surprise that she had found contentment in this new life. The town had become home, her students a source of joy and purpose. And Brock had become something she couldn't quite define but knew she valued more than she dared admit. One Saturday in early December, a snowstorm threatened, making Willow doubt whether Brock would make the journey into town. To her surprise and secret delight, he arrived at Rose's cafe just as the first snowflakes began to fall, his coat dusted white and his eyes bright with cold. "Wasn't sure you'd come," she admitted as he joined her at their usual table. "Promise, didn't I?" he replied simply, warming his hands around the coffee cup Rose set before him. "Though I may have to impose on Mrs. Lennox for a room tonight if this snow keeps up." They lingered longer than usual over their meal, neither eager to face the increasingly fierce storm. When they finally stepped outside, the street was already blanketed in white, the wind driving the snow in swirling eddies. "Let me see you home," Brock insisted, offering his arm. They walked slowly through the storm, their breaths forming clouds in the cold air. At the door to her quarters, Willow hesitated. "Would you like to come in?" "Just until the worst passes," she added hastily, aware of how the invitation might appear. Brock studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you." Her quarters were small but cozy, a sitting room with a small stove, a kitchen area, and a bedroom partitioned off by a curtain. Books lined the shelves Brock had helped her build one Saturday, and student artwork decorated the walls. A fire burned low in the stove, and Willow busied herself adding wood and putting on a kettle for tea. Brock stood somewhat awkwardly in the center of the room, his hat in his hands, looking somehow larger and more vital in the confines of her home than he did in the open spaces they usually shared. "Please sit," she invited, gesturing to the small sofa. "You must be cold." He settled himself carefully, and Willow was struck by how right he looked there, as if a space had been waiting for him all along. They talked as the storm raged outside, the conversation flowing easily as always. Brock spoke of his plans for the ranch, the new barn he was building, the foals expected in the spring. Willow shared stories of her students' progress, the Christmas pageant she was organizing. "You've made a good life here," Brock observed as she poured more tea. "The town's lucky to have you." "I'm the fortunate one," Willow replied. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this, being on my own, building something that's truly mine." "You were never meant to be someone's shadow," Brock said quietly. "Some men can't handle a woman with her own light." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. When the storm finally abated near midnight, Brock rose reluctantly to leave. At the door, he turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. "Thank you for the shelter," he said, his voice low. "It seems only fair," Willow replied with a small smile. "You did the same for me once." Something shifted in his gaze then, a warmth that made her breath catch. "Good night, Willow. Good night, Brock." After he left, Willow stood at the window watching his figure disappear into the snowy night, aware of a longing that had nothing to do with gratitude or friendship. Spring came to the territory with a riot of wildflowers and new life. Willow's garden bloomed with the seeds Brock had given her, and the town hummed with activity after the quiet winter months. New families arrived, bringing more students to the school and fresh faces to the community. Their Saturday suppers continued, though now sometimes they would walk afterward, exploring the town or sitting by the creek that gave Hollister's Creek its name. They were careful to maintain propriety. Willow was still technically a married woman, and her position in the town depended on her reputation, but the connection between them deepened with each passing week. Then one Saturday in late May, Brock didn't come. Willow waited at Rose's until well past 7, concern growing with each passing minute. It wasn't like him to miss their standing appointment without sending word. Finally, she paid for her uneaten meal and walked back to her quarters, telling herself there was surely a simple explanation: ranch work that couldn't wait, perhaps, or a problem with the horses he was training. Sunday passed with no word, then Monday. On Tuesday afternoon, as Willow was dismissing her students, she spotted a rider approaching the school at a hard gallop. Her heart leapt, thinking it might be Brock, but as the horse drew closer, she recognized young Tom Ellis, who worked at the livery stable. "Mrs. Harper." He called, reining in his lathered horse. "Doc Turner sent me, said to fetch you quick. It's Mr. Northcott, he's been hurt bad." The world seemed to tilt beneath Willow's feet. What happened? Rustlers hit his place, shot him when he tried to stop them. Tom's young face was grave. Doc's doing what he can, but it don't look good. Willow didn't remember gathering her things or locking the schoolhouse. The next thing she knew, she was riding behind Tom on his horse, clinging to his waist as they galloped toward Dr. Turner's office at the edge of town. The doctor's small surgery was quiet when they arrived, too quiet. Willow pushed through the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dr. Turner emerged from the back room, his shirt sleeves rolled up and blood staining his apron. "Mrs. Harper," he said, his tired face solemn. "I hoped Tom would find you quickly." "How is he?" Willow asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "alive, which is something of a miracle given where the bullet hit him." The doctor ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Took it high in the chest, missed his heart, but there's damage to his lung. He's lost a lot of blood. Will he?" Willow couldn't finish the question. "If he makes it through the night, his chances improve." Dr. Turner's kind eyes held no false promises. "He's asked for you several times." He led her to a small room at the back of the surgery where Brock lay on a narrow bed, his skin ashen against the white sheets. Bandages wrapped his chest, a spot of red seeping through despite the doctor's efforts. His breathing was shallow and labored, his eyes closed in a face drawn with pain. Willow moved to his side, gently taking his hand in hers. His skin felt too cool, his strong fingers limp in her grasp. "Brock," she whispered, brushing back a lock of hair from his forehead, "I'm here." His eyelids fluttered, then opened. For a moment, confusion clouded his gaze before recognition dawned. "Willow," he breathed, the word barely audible. "Don't try to talk," she urged, tears threatening to spill. "Save your strength." He shook his head slightly, wincing at the movement. "Need to tell you," he struggled for breath. "Rustlers recognized one. Walter Crane has a place north of here." "SHH, that doesn't matter now," Willow said, stroking his hand. "Just rest." "Sheriff should know," Brock insisted, his voice fading. "Took 20 head, might hit other ranches." "I'll tell him," she promised. "Now please rest." His eyes held hers for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them before exhaustion claimed him and his lids dropped closed again. Dr. Turner appeared at her side. "You should go home, Mrs. Harper. Get some rest yourself. I'll send word if there's any change." Willow shook her head firmly. "I'm staying." The doctor studied her face, then nodded. "I'll bring you a chair." Through the long night, Willow maintained her vigil. She bathed Brock's face when fever set in, held his hand through moments of delirium when he called out against unseen enemies, and prayed as she had never prayed before. Dr. Turner checked on them periodically, his face growing more concerned as Brock's fever rose. Near dawn, the crisis peaked. Brock's breathing became more labored, his skin burning hot to the touch. Willow, exhausted and terrified, held his hand to her cheek. "Please," she whispered, "please don't leave me, not you too." As if he heard her, Brock's eyes opened, fever bright but lucid. "Never," he murmured. "Promised I'd stay." The words echoed back to that first night by the fire, when a stranger had sat down beside a crying woman and offered his presence as comfort. Gradually, as the sun rose over the hills, Brock's fever broke. His breathing eased, and he fell into a natural sleep rather than the restless unconsciousness of before. When Dr. Turner checked on them, his face reflected cautious hope. "His body's fighting," he told Willow. "That's a good sign." For 3 days, Willow barely left Brock's side, returning to her quarters only to change clothes and check on her school. The town rallied around them. Mrs. Lennox brought food, Reverend Walsh stopped by to pray, and one of the older girls from the school took over Willow's classes temporarily. On the 4th day, Brock was strong enough to sit up briefly and take some broth. His eyes followed Willow as she moved around the small room, a tenderness in his gaze that made her heart flutter. "You shouldn't have stayed," he said as she adjusted his pillows. "Your reputation, hang my reputation," Willow interrupted fiercely. "You nearly died." A small smile touched his lips. "Didn't though, too stubborn." Dr. Turner declared that while Brock was out of immediate danger, he would need weeks of recovery before he could return to his ranch. The problem of where he would convalesce was solved unexpectedly by Mrs. Lennox, who offered a ground floor room at her hotel at a reduced rate. "Better than the doc's surgery," she declared practically. "And I can keep an eye on him while Mrs. Harper's teaching." The arrangement proved ideal. Brock gained strength slowly but steadily, moving from his bed to a chair by the window, then eventually taking short walks with Willow's support. During his recovery, news came that the sheriff had arrested Walter Crane and 2 other men for the rustling, recovering most of Brock's stolen cattle in the process. "Your neighbor's been looking after the rest of your stock," Willow told him as they sat in the hotel's small garden one evening. "Mr. Jenkins rides over every few days to check on things." "Good man, Jenkins," Brock nodded. "Still, I need to get back soon. Place won't run itself." Willow's heart sank at the thought of him leaving town, though she knew it was inevitable. These weeks of caring for him had brought them closer than ever, erasing the careful boundaries they'd maintained before. She'd come to treasure their quiet evenings together, the conversations that ranged from philosophy to favorite childhood memories, the way his face lit up when she entered the room. "Doc Turner says at least another 2 weeks before you can ride," she reminded him gently. Brock sighed, frustration evident in the set of his shoulders. "Ranch work doesn't wait for healing." "Would it help if I rode out with you this weekend?" Willow offered impulsively. "Just to check on things. I can write a list of what needs attention most urgently." His expression softened. "You do that, of course," she replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for a schoolteacher to ride out to a bachelor's ranch alone. Perhaps once it would have scandalized her, but near tragedy had a way of shifting priorities. That Saturday, they borrowed a buggy from the livery stable, Brock still too weak for horseback but determined to see his home. The journey took longer than usual due to frequent stops for him to rest, but by mid-afternoon they crested the final rise and Brock's ranch came into view. It was more impressive than Willow had imagined: a sturdy cabin with a wide porch, a new barn still under construction, corrals holding horses that lifted their heads at their approach, and beyond, the green expanse of grazing land where cattle dotted the landscape. "It's beautiful," Willow said honestly, taking in the scene. The mountains rose in the distance and a creek wound through the property, lined with cottonwoods that provided welcome shade. "It's home," Brock replied simply, but pride resonated in his voice. They spent the afternoon checking the property. Brock, leaning heavily on a walking stick, directed Willow through the chores that needed attention most urgently. She filled water troughs, measured out grain for the horses, and took notes about repairs needed to fencing and outbuildings. Inside the cabin, Willow found a space that reflected its owner: practical, unadorned but solid and welcoming. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, bookshelves lined another, and simple but well-made furniture filled the main room. The kitchen was basic but functional, and a door led to what she assumed was a bedroom. "It needs a woman's touch," Brock admitted, watching her take in his home. Never had much eye for the finer things. Willow turned to him, struck by something in his tone. He stood in the doorway, leaning on his stick, his eyes holding an emotion she couldn't quite name. "It's a wonderful home," she said softly. "You've built something to be proud of here." They returned to town before dusk, both quiet with their thoughts. At the hotel, Willow helped Brock to his room, concerned by his pallor and evident exhaustion. "You pushed yourself too hard today," she chided gently, helping him into the armchair by the window. "Worth it," he replied, his breathing labored. "Needed to see it." Make sure everything was still there. Willow fetched him water and the medicine Dr. Turner had prescribed for pain. As she handed him the glass, their fingers brushed, and he caught her hand in his. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "for everything." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Willow was acutely aware of his hand holding hers, the warmth of his skin, the strength still evident despite his weakened state. "I should go," she said reluctantly, withdrawing her hand. "It's getting late." Brock nodded, though regret flashed in his eyes. "Will I see you tomorrow?" "Of course," she promised, the words a balm to them both. Another month passed before Dr. Turner declared Brock fit to return to his ranch, though with strict instructions to avoid heavy labor for at least another few weeks. The news brought mixed emotions: for Willow, happiness for his recovery, but sadness at the prospect of their daily interactions ending. On his last evening in town, they sat together on the hotel's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. A comfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the town preparing for night. I've been thinking, Brock said finally, his voice thoughtful. About the future. Willow's heart quickened. Oh, my place is too big for one person, he continued, his eyes on the horizon. Always meant to have a family there someday. She hardly dared breathe, afraid to break whatever spell had fallen over them. I know your situation is complicated, Brock went on carefully. You're still legally married, and I respect that, but I thought, maybe you might want to come out to the ranch sometimes, see more of it. Help me plan what it could be. Willow turned to look at him, finding his gaze now fixed on her face, vulnerable and hopeful. Are you asking me to court you, Mr. Northcott? A smile touched his lips. In a manner of speaking. Though I reckon we've been doing that for months without calling it so. She couldn't deny the truth of his words. Their Saturday suppers, their long conversations, the care they'd shown each other, it had all been leading to this moment. I'd like that, she answered softly. Very much. The relief and joy that transformed his face made her heart swell. They sat together as darkness fell, not touching, yet somehow more connected than ever before. Summer turned to fall, and their courtship progressed with a sweetness that healed wounds neither had fully acknowledged before. Willow rode out to the ranch on Saturdays after school, sometimes staying through Sunday with Mrs. Lennox as chaperone to preserve propriety. Together, they worked in the garden Brock started for her, repaired fencing, and planned improvements to the cabin. In town, they made no secret of their attachment, though they maintained a respectful distance in public. The townspeople, having witnessed Willow's devotion during Brock's recovery, largely accepted their relationship with approving nods and knowing smiles. Only the legal complication of her marriage remained a shadow over their happiness. With no word from James in over a year, Willow finally consulted the circuit judge during his autumn visit to Hollister's Creek. Abandonment is grounds for divorce in this territory, Judge Carlton informed her after hearing her story. Especially with evidence he left you in peril. If he doesn't contest the filing, and it sounds unlikely he would, the matter could be settled by spring. Willow filed the necessary papers that day, a weight lifting from her shoulders as she took this final step toward freedom. That evening, she shared the news with Brock as they sat by the fire in his cabin, their future suddenly closer than ever before. Spring, he repeated, hope kindling in his eyes. That's not so very far away. Not at all, Willow agreed, allowing herself to imagine what might come after a wedding, perhaps a life built together on this land they both loved. Winter descended on the territory with unusual ferocity that year. Heavy snows blocked the mountain passes, isolating Hollister's Creek for weeks at a time. Brock moved temporarily back to town, unwilling to risk being separated from Willow by impassable roads. He took work at the livery stable to keep busy, and their evenings were spent planning for spring the crops they would plant, the additions to the cabin they would build. Christmas brought a brief thaw, and with it, an unexpected visitor. Willow was decorating the schoolhouse for the holiday pageant when Mrs. Lennox burst in, her usually composed face flushed with agitation. You need to come quickly, she said without preamble. He's back. Willow didn't need to ask who. A cold dread settled in her stomach as she followed Mrs. Lennox to the hotel, where a commotion could be heard from the street. Inside, she found James Harper standing in the lobby, travel-worn and thinner than she remembered, but with the same charming smile that had once captured her heart. There she is, he exclaimed upon seeing her, stepping forward with arms outstretched. My wayward wife. Willow stopped just beyond his reach, aware of the crowd gathering Mrs. Lennox, the desk clerk, several hotel guests, and to her dismay, Brock, who had just entered from the back hallway. His face hardened as he took in the scene, but he remained where he was, allowing her to handle the situation. What are you doing here, James? Willow asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Is that any way to greet your husband? James laughed, though there was an edge to it. I've come to collect you, of course. My fortunes have changed, darling. Struck silver after all. I can give you the life I promised now. Willow stared at him, this man who had once been the center of her world. She searched for any trace of the feelings she'd once had for him, but found nothing but a distant pity. You left me alone in the wilderness, she said quietly. You abandoned me without a backward glance. James waved a dismissive hand. A regrettable lapse in judgment. I was not myself. But I'm here now, ready to make amends. His eyes narrowed slightly. And you are still my wife." The word hung in the air, a reminder of the bonds that legally still tied them despite the divorce petition working its slow way through the territorial courts. "Not for much longer," Willow replied, drawing herself up. "I've filed for divorce on grounds of abandonment." James's expression darkened. "Now see here, the lady has made her position clear." Brock's voice cut through the tension as he stepped forward, his stance protective without being possessive. James's gaze shifted to him, recognition dawning. "And who might you be?" "A friend," Brock replied simply. "More than a friend, I'd wager." James's smile turned ugly. "So that's how it is, not even waiting for the marriage bed to cool before finding another to warm it." Willow felt her cheeks burn with anger and embarrassment. "You have no right, I have every right." James snapped, his charming facade crumbling. "You're my wife, and I'll not be made a fool of by some backwater, that's enough." Sheriff Miller's authoritative voice silenced the room as he pushed through the gathered crowd. "What's all this commotion about, Mrs.?" Lennox quickly explained the situation, her fierce loyalty to Willow evident in every word. The sheriff listened, then turned to James. "Mr. Harper, I understand you have a claim here, but I won't have you causing a disturbance in my town. Mrs. Harper has established herself as a respected member of this community, and her personal affairs are just that personal." "She's still legally my wife," James insisted, though with less conviction under the sheriff's stern gaze. "For now," Sheriff Miller acknowledged. "But I suggest you conduct any discussions about your marital status privately and civilly. Otherwise, you'll find yourself spending the night in my jail for disturbing the peace." James glared but nodded stiffly. "Fine. I'd like a private word with my wife then." Willow hesitated, then nodded. "We can talk in the hotel dining room. It's empty now." As she led James toward the dining room, she caught Brock's eye. The concern there was evident, but also trust in her to handle this final ghost from her past. The conversation that followed was tense but surprisingly brief. Away from his audience, James's bluster faded, revealing the opportunist Willow had gradually come to recognize during their journey west. "I won't pretend I came back solely out of affection," he admitted, pacing the empty dining room. "Truth is, I've got investors interested in my silver claim. Respectable men who expect a respectable partner. A married man inspires more confidence than a bachelor." Willow almost laughed at the irony. "So you abandoned me when I was inconvenient, and now you want me back because I'm useful." James had the grace to look somewhat abashed. "It wasn't my finest moment leaving you, but we could start fresh. My claim is producing well. You'd have comforts, a position in society." "I have those things here," Willow replied calmly. "I have work I love, respect I've earned, and people who value me for myself, not for the appearance I create." "This cowboy you've taken up with," James said, his tone dismissive. "What can he offer that compares to what I'm proposing?" Willow thought of Brock, his quiet strength, his unfailing kindness, the home he'd built with his own hands, and invited her to help shape. "Everything that matters." James studied her face, perhaps truly seeing her for the first time. The woman before him was not the same one he'd left by the campfire. That woman had been broken, dependent. This Willow stood straight, her eyes clear and determined, her voice steady. "You've changed," he observed. "Yes," she agreed simply. "I have." In the end, faced with her resolute stance and perhaps his own recognition that forcing her return would create more problems than it solved, James surprised her. "What would it take to expedite this divorce you filed for?" Relief washed over her. "Your signature on the papers. Your acknowledgement of abandonment, no contest to the proceedings." He nodded thoughtfully. "And in return, a clean break, no claims on each other's property or future earnings." James considered this, then extended his hand. "I believe we have an agreement, Mrs. Harper." "Or soon to be Miss Reed again, I suppose." Willow shook his hand firmly. "No, I'll keep Harper for now. The children at school know me by that name." And someday soon, she thought but didn't say, she would have a new name entirely. The next morning, James met with Judge Carlton, who happened to be passing through town on his circuit. By noon, he had signed the necessary papers acknowledging abandonment and agreeing to an uncontested divorce. By evening, he was gone from Hollister's Creek, headed back to his silver mine with the promise that final divorce papers would reach him there for signature when the court processed them. Willow found Brock waiting at their usual table at Rose's cafe, his face revealing nothing of his thoughts. She slid into the seat across from him, suddenly shy despite all they'd shared. "He's gone," she said simply, "and he's agreed not to contest the divorce." Relief washed over Brock's features. "You're sure he won't change his mind, I'm sure," Willow confirmed. "He came back for appearance's sake, not for me. Once he realized I wouldn't play the role he wanted, he was practical enough to cut his losses." Brock reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I was afraid," he admitted quietly. "When I saw him standing there, all I could think was that he'd come to take you away, that after everything the law would be on his side because he's your husband." "Not for much longer," Willow reminded him, squeezing his hand. "Judge Carlton says with James's cooperation, the divorce could be final within 2 months. 2 months, Brock repeated, a slow smile spreading across his face. Just in time for spring. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and new beginnings. The divorce was finalized in late February, the papers arriving with the first mail delivery after the mountain passes cleared. Willow read them alone in her quarters, a strange mixture of sadness and liberation washing over her as she traced the official seal that declared her marriage dissolved. That Saturday, Brock arrived at her door not with his usual casual greeting but with nervous formality, wearing his best shirt and carrying a small wooden box. "I thought we might ride out to the ranch today," he suggested after she invited him in. "The wildflowers are starting to bloom along the creek." The ride out was filled with comfortable conversation, though Willow sensed an undercurrent of anticipation in Brock's manner. At the ranch, he helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "I want to show you something," he said, leading her not toward the cabin but down a path to the creek where, as promised, wildflowers painted the banks in yellows and purples. They walked in companionable silence until they reached a bend in the creek where a massive old cottonwood spread its branches. Fresh green leaves were just beginning to unfurl, dappling the sunlight that filtered through. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Brock told her, his voice soft with affection. "I come here to think, to plan. Every improvement I've made to this place started as an idea right here under this tree." Willow smiled, touched by this glimpse into his private world. "It's beautiful." Brock turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Willow," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "A year ago I found you crying by a campfire, abandoned and alone. I couldn't have known then how completely that moment would change my life." Her heart began to race as she realized what was happening. "I sat down beside you that night because it was the right thing to do," he continued. "I stayed because even then there was something about you that called to me. Your courage, your strength even in your darkest moment, those qualities shone through." Brock reached into his pocket and withdrew the small wooden box. "Every day since then has only confirmed what I think I knew from the start, that you are the woman I've been waiting for all my life." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant gold ring set with a small diamond that caught the sunlight filtering through the leaves. "I've been saving for this since I established the ranch," he explained, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice. "Always believed that someday I'd find someone to share this life with. Never imagined she'd be as perfect for me as you are." Tears welled in Willow's eyes as Brock dropped to one knee before her. "Willow Harper, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Of making this ranch our home, of building a future together right here." For a moment, Willow was transported back to that night by the fire, the pain of abandonment, the fear of an uncertain future, and then the quiet presence of the man now kneeling before her. The man who had sat down beside her when she was crying and stayed, not just for that night but for every day since, proving his constancy through actions rather than words. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Brock Northcott, I will marry you." Joy transformed his face as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to take her in his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise of tenderness and respect, but it deepened with the passion they'd both held in check for so long. When they finally broke apart, breathless and smiling, Brock rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "Have for a long time now, and I love you," Willow replied, the words feeling like coming home, "more than I ever thought possible." They were married 2 weeks later in the Hollisters Creek Church, the entire town turning out to celebrate. Mrs. Lennox wept openly as Willow walked down the aisle in a cream-colored dress she'd ordered from Denver. Reverend Walsh performed the ceremony with evident pleasure, and even Judge Carlton returned to town for the occasion, pleased to see the final happy outcome of the legal matter he'd helped resolve. That night, Brock carried Willow across the threshold of the cabin that was now their home. Changes were already visible: curtains at the windows, a quilt on the bed, bookshelves rearranged to accommodate her collection alongside his. Small touches that transformed a bachelor's dwelling into a family home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Northcott," Brock murmured against her hair. The name felt right, a perfect fit for this new chapter of her life. "It's good to be home," she replied, and meant it with all her heart. In the years that followed, the ranch prospered under their joint care. Brock's cattle herd grew, and the horses he trained became known throughout the territory for their quality. Willow continued teaching for a time, riding to town each day until the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Emma, made the journey impractical. By then, Hollisters Creek had grown enough to need a second teacher anyway, and Willow found new purpose in creating a home filled with love and learning. A son followed 2 years later, then another daughter. The cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family, with Brock adding rooms as needed, always with an eye toward creating spaces where memories could be made. On their 10th anniversary, they sat together on the porch watching their children play beneath the cottonwood by the creek. The ranch had flourished beyond their early dreams, the barn completed, orchards planted, fields yielding abundant harvests. "Did you ever imagine this?" Willow asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "That night you found me by the fire," Brock's arm tightened around her. "Not specifically," he admitted, "but I knew even then that you were someone worth staying for." Willow thought about journeys, the one that had brought her west with James, the one that had left her abandoned and heartbroken, and the one that began when a kind stranger sat down beside her and offered comfort without expectation. "Thank you," she said softly, "for staying." Brock kissed her temple gently. "Always," he promised, and Willow knew with absolute certainty that it was a promise he would keep for all the days of their lives. As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Willow Harper Northcott gave silent thanks for the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. The path had not been easy, but it had led her here to this man, these children, this home built on love and respect and steadfast devotion. And in the deepening twilight, with her family gathered close around her, Willow knew she had found something far more precious than the dreams that had first drawn her west. She had found where she truly belonged.